A very good morning, students, to all of you. This is Dr. Sanjana Sharma. Students, today we are going to know and learn about the life and achievement of veteran, famous, renowned British romantic poet William Wordsworth. Students, William Wordsworth was born on April 7 in the year 1770 at Cockermouth in Cumberland, England. His father was the attorney to the Earl of Lonsdale, and his mother belonged to a reputed good social family of Penrith. And students, his early boyhood was passed partly at Cockermouth and partly at Penrith. And as a child, he was a moody boy. At In the 8th year of his life, Wordsworth was sent to school at Hawkshead, where he was allowed to read whatever books he liked. Fielding's novel Don Quixote, Gulliver's Travels, and The Tale of Tub were his most favorite books. In the year 1787, Wordsworth entered at St. John's College, Cambridge, as an undergraduate. And students, here he was somewhat untamed, heady, and an arrogant boy. He didn't care much about the university curriculum, and his education was largely carried on by self-chosen reading and by communion with nature. Students, here in the third summer vacations, he went with a college friend on a walking tour of France and Switzerland. He landed at Calais on the very eve of that great federal day when the trees of liberty were planted all over France. The revolution thrilled him as it thrilled all Europe. Students, he took his Bachelor of Arts degree in the year 1791 and settled in London with no definite plans for his future career. At one time, he would thought of entering church and at another of joining military, but did not think himself fit enough for any of these careers. Most of his time he passed in rambling through streets of city of London, and the urban rush and roar disgusted him. In the year 1791, in the month of November, Wordsworth once again went to France for the second time, and it was also during this visit to France that he fell violently in love with Anne Boleyn and had a daughter named Caroline by her. The excesses of revolutionaries and the declaration of war between England and France in the year 1793 rudely shattered the poet's dream of a new-born world through liberty. A period of gloom and despondency followed, in which he lost his faith in art, in nature, and God himself. It was the healing influence of the society of his beloved sister Dorothy, his friend Coleridge, and of the example of virtue, faith, and fortitude presented by the Cumbrian peasants that enabled him to recover from this severe moral crisis with the passing of time. About the year 1796, a young friend and admirer of the poet died of consumption, and he left him an annual legacy of pound 1900 for the express purpose of setting him free to devote his life to his poetic mission. Students, now he settled with his sister Dorothy at Desdown, and from here removed to Alfoxden near Quantock Hills in 1797, and thus became a close neighbor of Samuel Taylor Coleridge his lifelong friend, then residing at neither stowaway. Students, the close companionship between the two resulted in the publication of the epoch making lyrical ballads in the year 1798. After the publication of this volume, the Wordsworths left on a tour of Germany. Towards the close of 1799, Wordsworth settled with his sister at Townhead in Gresham, and in October 1802 he married Mary Hutchinson. And from now onwards he lived an ideal poet's life dedicated to the ideal of plain living and high thinking, surrounded by loving friends, inspired by the familiar voices of mountain, lake, and stream, and above all, blessed by the constant home companionship of a devoted sister and an equally devoted wife. Students, in 1808, he moved to Alenkirk at the north end of Gresham, and from there in 1811 to Parsonage House of this very town. Students, he was a model husband and most affectionate father. He had 5 children, of whom the death of 2, Catherine and Thomas, about the year 1812, was a severe shock to him. He could no longer remain at the parsonage, and in 1813, at the earliest opportunity, moved to Royal Mount, his favorite and last abode. Here, students, he was fortunate enough to enjoy frequently the company of such affectionate friends as Southey, Coleridge, De Quincey. Traveling was a passion with him, and up to the end of his days, he undertook long tours, and many of his poems were inspired by his experiences during a journey. Students, his affectionate brother John died in the year 1805, and his sister Dorothy fell seriously ill in the year 1832, and his close friend Coleridge departed for his heavenly abode in 1834, and Sarah Hutchinson too followed Coleridge, and his own daughter Dora in the year 1847 died, and all these incidents cast a dark shadow over the poet's last years. Students, he died of pleurisy in the year 1850 at the age of 80, and he was buried in the Gasmere churchyard among the hills and people he had loved so well. By the time of his death, he had come to be regarded as the patriarch of English letters. Students, Wordsworth was a voluminous writer. His poetic span covers a period of more than 60 years, and so far as the bulk of this poetry is concerned, few can challenge comparison with him. Students, his poetic career can be divided into 4 parts. The early period belongs to the period before 1791. The best known poems of this period are Descriptive Sketches and Evening Walk. Students, the second period is called the period of gloom, the period of guilt and remorse from 1792 to 1797. Wordsworth had been to France, had already met Anne Boleyn, and had a sense of guilt haunted him. His feelings of remorse and his gloom find expression in the unsuccessful tragedy, The Boarders' Guilt and Sorrow, and Margaret or Ruined Cottage. The last mentioned poem, later incorporated into The Excursion, is the first piece of work done by Wordsworth which gives any clear indication of his characteristic powers. Students, the glorious decade begins at 1797 and lasts till 1807. the decade in which the poet's powers were at their zenith and in which he produced his best works. These were days of peace and contentment. Influence of Coleridge and his sister Dorothy helped him to overcome the moral crisis consequent upon his visit to France, and he again regained his joy in nature. And students, lyrical ballads published in 1798, containing along with many other admirable pieces such as works entitled Lines Written in Early Spring, Michael, Fountain, etc., and ending with the lines written about Tinton Abbey. Lyrical ballads proved very popular. The second edition was published in the year 1800 and then in 1802. To the 1802 edition, Wordsworth added a preface which shows that Wordsworth was not only a great poet but also a critic of penetration and insight. Peter Bell was published in the year 1819. Prelude, or the account of growth of poet's mind, commenced in the year 1799 and completed in 1805. Though it was published only after Wordsworth's death in 1850. Students, it is an autobiographical poem running into 14 books. Students, the great immortality ode began in the year 1802 on the eve of his happy marriage and completed in 1805 after a gap of 2 to 3 years. Wordsworth was inspired to write sonnets on hearing the sonnets of Milton read out to him in the year 1801. He continued to write sonnets up to the end of his days, and has left behind him more than 500 sonnets. Students, in the end, we can say that Wordsworth was a great literary critic as well. His preface to the lyrical ballads in the year 1802, revised and enlarged with the subsequent editions, is a critical document of abiding significance. So students, he was a great worshipper of nature. प्रकृति के पुजारी थे वर्ड्सवर्थ. प्रकृति को उन्होंने देखा, जिया और कविताओं में ढाला. हिंदी साहित्य की अगर हम बात करें तो हिंदी में जो छायावादी कवि हैं, पंत, निराला, सुमित्रानंदन पंत, जयशंकर प्रसाद इत्यादि जो हैं, ये प्रकृति के पुजारी थे. और वी कैन कंपेयर द छायावाद इन हिंदी with the romanticism in English literature. Such was the poetic career of one of the greatest poets of England, one to whom Matthew Arnold assigns a place next only to Shakespeare and Milton. Students, here our today's class comes to an end. Thank you very much.